你好，大家，我叫陶约翰，我是一个英文老师，在台北。Have you heard of this phrase, forbidden fruit? You could say, ooh, don't touch that. That is forbidden fruit. For example, something that is reserved for someone is forbidden fruit for other people. You could say, don't eat that slice of cake. We're saving it for mom.That is forbidden fruit. But where does this phrase come from? Forbidden fruit. In the first book of the Bible, Genesis, God tells the first man, Adam, and the first woman, Eve, to not eat from a tree. The tree is called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.Just like a parent telling their kids, don't eat that, God gives a simple command. Now, friends, the story of the forbidden fruit is really, really important in the Bible because it is what we call the original sin, the first sin that the first humans did against God. Sin is a problem where we break God's rules. This amazing story teaches us that God has an enemy. He's called the snake in Genesis, but this is the devil, or a spirit that loves to lie and go against the truth. Have you ever believed a lie and it caused you to eat forbidden fruit? Make sure you avoid forbidden fruit. The next phrase, a season for everything, is one of my favorites. You'll hear the word season a lot in English conversation. A season means a period of time, the time when something is happening. In English, we say the year has 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. But we use this word season in a lot of different ways. We could say humans have different seasons of life. Their childhood, their adolescence or teenage years, their adulthood, and their old age. These are different seasons of life. But did you know that God has planned a season for everything? God causes every season because he has a perfect plan. Just like the cold of winter or the heat of summer might be unpleasant, they're part of a big natural plan for life to grow. And in the same way, God has different seasons in our lives. If you are in a difficult season, remember this. There is a season for everything. This phrase comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, and many seasons are described. There is a time or a season for everything. Let's use it in a sentence. Maybe you see a strange new fashion and you say, well, I guess there's a season for everything. Maybe you see a strange trend on the internet and you say, well, there's a season for everything. When you begin to understand there is a season for everything, it's hard to be surprised and worried. It's really important to remember that every season is part of God's plan. Do you know that there's a season for everything? Here's the next phrase. Get thee behind me, Satan, or get behind me, Satan. This was something Jesus said to one of his best friends, a man named Simon Peter. But who is Satan? Satan is the number one enemy of God. Satan is sometimes called the enemy or the father of lies, or even the devil. Satan is a spirit that influences people to believe a lie because they reject God's love. Jesus tells his friend Peter, get thee behind me, Satan, which basically means get out of my way and stop trying to distract me. But what did Peter do to deserve this? Jesus had been telling his followers, I'm going to die on the cross. And Peter trying to be helpful, said, "Don't talk that way." But Jesus was telling the truth, and Jesus wanted people to understand that he had come to die for the sins of the world. Jesus had been telling his followers, "I'm going to die." And Peter did not like that. He encouraged Jesus to not say that. We read in the book of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 23. Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Did you know, friends, that God wants us to share his thinking? What is God's thinking? Well, it's found in the Bible, and it's found through the teachings of Jesus. Jesus came with a new way of living. He came with love to give even his own life. The next phrase is all about war. Live by the sword, die by the sword. When we talk about the sword in English, we're talking about violence caused by weapons. For example, in older English writing, you might hear that the sword took someone's family, which means the person's family was killed by physical violence or military force. The Bible talks a lot about the sword destroying people's lives. Right before Jesus gave his own life on the cross, one of his followers, Peter, tried to protect him. Peter loved Jesus. He did not want Jesus to give up his life. He didn't understand that Jesus needed to give his life so that Peter could have a new life with God. So when men came to arrest Jesus, Peter took out his sword and tried to attack. Jesus said to Peter, "Peter, put your sword away, because all who live by the sword will die by the sword." Now, friends, there's a very practical lesson here. If you are a person who lives through physical violence, that physical violence will come back to you. But more importantly, live the way Jesus did. Instead of wanting people to get what they deserve, want people to get what Jesus gives them. This is called a life of grace, and it's the opposite of living by the sword. We use this phrase in English. For example, in recent news, a general was killed by an assassination. People might say, well, live by the sword, die by the sword. It's not a surprise when someone who lives in a violent way dies a violent death. It's a big part of the sin in this world. People live by the sword, and sadly, they die by the sword. We all need God's help. The final phrase is a good Samaritan. Let's review it. If a person is a good Samaritan, it means they are someone who was passing by some kind of a disaster or a bad event. They chose to stop and help the person in need. For example, you could say, Susie lost her dog in the park, but 3 good Samaritans helped her look for her dog, and eventually she found it. This phrase comes from Jesus's famous story, the Good Samaritan. In that story, a man who's been injured is passed by people who should help him. It's their job. But instead, a man called a Samaritan, an outsider, helps him. Jesus is telling us who we should love and who we should help. Not only people from our family or friend group, not only people from our country, but even strangers. In fact, we should help our enemies. Friends, the phrases of Jesus have found their way throughout the English language. If you're studying English, but you're not yet a Christian, take some time to read Jesus' teachings for yourself. Do this not just for your own education, but for your own spirit. There's a reason that Jesus has had such an impact on the world. Here at Bible Talk, we're so happy that you have joined us today. If you have any questions or comments, we're always happy to answer. If you want to join one of our live Bible studies, we've put the link below. At Dazhi Gospel Church every Saturday, I do a live Bible study where we can go over the teachings of Jesus. This month, we're studying the book of John, one of Jesus' good friends who wrote about Jesus' story. We're learning a lot of English, but more importantly, we're learning a lot about God together. We love you guys. Hit the subscribe button if you want YouTube to send you more of our content. We'll see you next time.